In this video, we are going to be covering the Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, sometimes known as GAAS, G-A-A-S. Now, these 10 Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, they're considered relatively high level. They were developed by the AICPA, the Auditing Standards Board. There are three main categories that we're going to learn: General Standards, Fieldwork Standards, and Reporting Standards. Now, the one thing I want to mention here or caution you on is, and I'm not sure why you're watching the video, if you're watching it as you prepare for the CPA exam, perhaps you're taking classes in auditing, or perhaps you're just looking to expand your professional knowledge. But these types of questions come up on a lot of these exams if you're tested on it. These, as far as these 10 generally accepted auditing standards, this is a kind of a hot topic for questions. And what it boils down to in many cases is that in auditing, there are some things you just need to memorize. There are plenty of concepts out there as well, but there are some things that you just need to memorize lists and be able to pull them out, be able to understand when you see that term, what does it basically mean. So with these, we have a couple of things we need to go through. Just the three main categories. First of all, again, general, fieldwork, and reporting standards. It's not a great mnemonic for that, GFR. But when we get to the 10 standards, I'm going to show you a mnemonic. It's not the best mnemonic, but it's something to remember, and it's stuck with me for several years since I first learned it. It's stuck with me all the way till now. So I'm going to tell you the same thing. If you want to create your own mnemonic for it, that's fine. But with the three main categories, general standards are basically dealing with the qualifications that auditors must have to be involved with an audit and how they should conduct themselves in the audit. The fieldwork standards relate more to the details of how an audit should be performed. And the reporting standards are after the fact. How should the information be communicated? What's required of that audit report? Now, the mnemonic here, we're going to see this multiple times. I'm going to hit it and repeat it quite a bit. The mnemonic is not the greatest. It's tip si acto. Tip C S-I-E acto. I will mention that an alternative version of this is tip pi acto, P-I-E instead of S-I-E, and we'll see why there can be a difference later on. Again, it's dependent upon what you feel is best to remember. It's not a word by any means, but it's stuck with me for years and years, so I'm trying to communicate that to you as well. Tip si acto, and they are separated because we have the general, fieldwork, and reporting standards. That's the three different sections of that acronym. The first three, the general standards: training, independence, professional care. The C, S-I-E, supervision, internal control, evidence. And then accordance with GAAP, consistency, disclosure, and opinion. And we'll see what that means here in just a second. So the general standards: training. The auditor must have adequate technical training and proficiency to perform the audit. They must be educated. They must have experience. They must know what they're doing for obvious reasons before they can be involved in an audit. Independence becomes important because as an auditor, your opinion is trusted. There can be no bias that anybody can perceive between you and the client, because as soon as they perceive any sort of bias, they're not going to trust your information, or they're going to be less likely to fully trust it, and the value you're adding to that information has diminished greatly. So the auditor must maintain independence in mental attitude in all matters relating to the audit from beginning to end. Professional care, or sometimes known as due professional care. This means that the auditor must take care, be cautious, be careful about doing their due diligence for that audit. Now, that phrase comes up, due diligence, or doing your due diligence. That basically means make sure you're reviewing according to all the standards, you're promoting a high level of quality, and all of that. You're taking care when you're preparing that audit report and when you've done the audit itself. Now the Fieldwork standards, this is the CSIE or the PI. So the first one is either supervision. Well, it's supervision and planning. So if you want to start with supervision to remember it, or if you want to start with planning and just say planning and supervision, maybe PI is a better acronym than C. I just learned it with C, and that's stuck with me. So supervision and planning, the auditor must adequately plan the work, get things going, make sure they have all the right people there, all the right tools, plenty of time, and they must properly supervise any assistants. So if you contract with some temporary workers, if you get an expert involved, if you have assistants, you as the lead auditor are in charge of making sure everything they do makes sense and that it relates to the overall audit. It's going to be your name ultimately that goes in that audit. Internal control, as you engage in an audit, one of the first things you need to do is understand how the company's internal control system is working or isn't working. You need to know whether there are any weaknesses, whether you can rely on it, and to what extent, because that's going to determine what type of detection risk you're concerned with. In other words, what level of audit work do you need to engage in? If you can assess the control risk as low, in other words, if you can rely on the controls working as they were intended, you may not have to do as much audit work on your side because there's less risk overall. They have good systems that should catch things, so you're going to be looking for fewer and fewer things on your side. Evidence, when you're in the field, when you're doing the audit, evidence is what you're reviewing. So you have to obtain sufficient, appropriate evidence to give you a reasonable basis for an audit opinion. This is all the documentation you're looking at, all the interviews with people, your tours of the facility, your own observations, your own analytical procedures. All of this is evidence that you'll be reviewing. And again, that's the Fieldwork standard there. Reporting standards. So these standards are important when you are actually filling out or completing the audit and communicating it through a final report, your audit report. This one has 4 of them. So we have the in accordance with GAAP. You must state an opinion whether the financial statements are presented in accordance with GAAP or not, or you must explicitly disclaim an opinion saying you cannot reach an opinion, which usually means there was a scope limitation of some sort. So are they or are they not in accordance with GAAP? Consistency is another thing you have to, you only communicate it if it's not consistent. The assumption is that things are consistent. In other words, the companies use the same methods year after year, all of that. It's only if there's something that's inconsistent that you have to communicate. Disclosure. One of your roles as an auditor is taking a look at the footnotes they're communicating to you, the disclosures they're making, to make sure, first of all, they're correct, there are no material misstatements of fact, and make sure they've included all the disclosures that are necessary based on the transactions that have occurred. And finally, an opinion. We mentioned that up above, but this specifically is there has to be an opinion. Back to the mnemonic again. The general, fieldwork, and reporting standards. TIP, C, ACTO. Training, independence, professional care, supervision, internal control, evidence. Accordance with GAAP, consistency, disclosure, and opinion. This is one of those things, especially if you're doing coursework or if you're preparing for the CPA exam, you want to practice this over and over and over because these should be very easy points and you don't want to miss them. So keep that in mind as you're going through this. You can use this slide that's blank and try to remember what is T, what is I, what is C. Quiz yourself. Now, the last thing I want to mention here is, we've been talking about GAAS, Generally Accepted Auditing Standards, and there's a document linked there that'll take you to that list of 10. It's the AICPA website. But then we also have statements on auditing standards that are in more detail. So this is similar to the accounting side. where you have the statement on financial accounting concepts, just very few of them, but at a high level. And then you have the statement on financial accounting standards, and there are the more detailed rules. So I wanted to mention that and show you how that works. So this first link we have here, again, it's through the AICPA, but it's their actual auditing, the generally accepted auditing standards, the high-level ones. Now notice this used to be SAS number 1 that set the stage. It's been redesignated under the new clarified standards, AU Section 150. But if you go down here, you'll see your general standards, training, independence, professional care, your fieldwork standards, planning, supervision, and then you have the internal control, the opinion. Under the reporting standards, you have in accordance with GAAP, you have consistency, you have disclosure, and you have opinion again. So those are the generally accepted auditing standards, but let's take a quick look at the detailed standards. So if we go back to this link down here, the statements on auditing standards, we'll see those. And that brings you up to this website here, where again we have the clarified statements on auditing standards. And if you scroll down, you'll see a list of them. The original standard before the clarifications, the SASs, and then the actual clarified standards, AU-C for the clarified, and they have the different section numbers for those. It gives you an information about a little title and a little summary about what that's for, but that's where you'll find those particular standards. So some of those are going to be talked about in more detail in later sessions, later videos, but for now it was just more focused on the generally accepted auditing standards. So hopefully this has helped to clarify the standards for you, what purpose they serve, and all of that. I thank you for your time, and I will talk to you in the next video.